The deafening roar of laughter echoed through the galactic training hall as Sergeant Kale stood, a small human amidst towering aliens, receiving yet another jab about his size. The room was a vast arena, filled with diverse beings from across the galaxy, all training to become elite soldiers. The advanced technology and intricate designs of the training equipment only emphasized the disparity between Kale and his comrades. "Hey Kale, do they make armor in your size? Or do you borrow from the kids section?" Commander Roar's booming voice cut through the laughter, his hulking form towering over Kale. The commander's scales glistened under the artificial lights, his muscles rippling with every movement. Kale clenched his fists, forcing a smile. "Size doesn't matter if you know how to use it." Lieutenant Zara, a wiry, tactical alien with a knack for strategy, stepped forward, her antennae twitching in Kale's direction. "Ignore them, Kale. Show them what you've got." The tension in the room thickened as Roar pointed to the simulation arena. "Let's see if you can keep up, little human." Kale's heart pounded as he approached the entrance to the simulation. The arena was a sprawling labyrinth of obstacles, each designed to test the physical limits and strategic minds of the soldiers. As the door slid open, revealing the first challenge, Kale took a deep breath and stepped inside. The simulation began with a blaring siren, signaling the start of the test. Kale sprinted forward, his smaller frame allowing him to maneuver quickly through the narrow passages. He could hear the heavy footsteps of his larger comrades struggling behind him, their bulky forms unable to navigate the tight spaces as easily. Kale's mind raced, analyzing every corner and obstacle. He remembered his training, focusing on his strengths, agility, quick reflexes, and a sharp strategic mind. He leaped over barriers, ducked under low-hanging beams, and slipped through tight gaps, his movements fluid and precise. Halfway through the simulation, the path opened into a vast chamber filled with moving platforms and laser grids. Kale paused for a moment, assessing the situation. He could see the end goal, a control panel that would deactivate the lasers and open the final door. He calculated his approach, noting the timing of the lasers and the movement of the platforms. With a determined breath, he dashed forward, his body a blur of motion. He dodged and weaved through the laser grids, timing his jumps perfectly to land on the moving platforms. Sweat dripped down his face as he neared the control panel, his muscles burning from the effort. Behind him, the sounds of struggle and frustration grew louder as his comrades tried to catch up. Kale reached the control panel, quickly deactivating the lasers and opening the door. He turned back, catching a glimpse of Commander Roar and Lieutenant Zara pushing through the final obstacles. Kale's chest heaved as he stood at the exit, waiting for his comrades to catch up. Roar's eyes widened in surprise as he saw Kale standing there, victorious. The commander's mocking grin faded, replaced by a look of begrudging respect. "Well done, Kale," Roar admitted, his voice gruff. "You've got more fight in you than I gave you credit for." Kale nodded, wiping the sweat from his brow. "It's not about the size, Commander. It's about how you use your strengths." Zara approached, a proud smile on her face. "You showed them, Kale. This is just the beginning." As the simulation ended, the arena doors opened, revealing the bustling training hall once more. The laughter and mockery had ceased, replaced by murmurs of admiration and curiosity. Kale's performance had turned heads, proving that size wasn't the only measure of a soldier's worth. The alarm blared throughout the base, cutting through the early morning quiet like a knife. Red lights flashed urgently, casting an ominous glow over the sprawling compound. Sergeant Kale, still groggy from sleep, was on his feet in an instant, adrenaline pumping through his veins. "All personnel, report to battle stations. This is not a drill," the intercom crackled. Kale sprinted down the corridor, his mind racing. The surprise attack had thrown the entire base into chaos. He could hear the distant sounds of explosions and the unmistakable hum of enemy ships outside the walls. His comrades, still adjusting to the rude awakening, hurried past him, their expressions a mix of fear and determination. As he reached the command center, the tension was palpable. Commander Roar, his usual confident demeanor replaced by a grim urgency, barked orders at his officers. Lieutenant Zara was already there, her eyes scanning the holomap that displayed the enemy positions. "Kale, over here!" Zara called out, waving him over. Kale joined her, his eyes locking onto the map. The enemy forces were closing in fast, their ships outnumbering the base's defenses. He quickly assessed the situation, noting the weak points in the base's perimeter. "We're outgunned and outnumbered," Kale said, his voice steady despite the chaos. "But if we can disrupt their command structure, we might stand a chance." Roar nodded, his respect for Kale now evident in his eyes. "What do you suggest, Sergeant?" Kale pointed to a narrow pass on the map. "Here. It's the weakest point in their formation. If I can get through and take out their command ship, it could throw them into disarray." Zara's antennae twitched with anticipation. "I'll go with you. We'll need to move fast." With a plan in place, Kale and Zara geared up, grabbing their weapons and securing their armor. The noise of the battle grew louder as they made their way to the exit, the ground shaking with each explosion. The air outside was thick with smoke and the acrid scent of burning metal. "Stay close," Kale instructed, his voice firm. "We only have one shot at this." They moved swiftly through the chaos, Kale's small size allowing him to slip through gaps and avoid enemy fire. Zara, following closely, used her tactical skills to cover their advance, picking off enemies with precision shots. As they approached the narrow pass, the intensity of the battle increased. The enemy was relentless, their numbers overwhelming. Kale's heart pounded, but he forced himself to stay focused. They had to reach the command ship. "Kale, over there!" Zara shouted, pointing to a cluster of enemy soldiers blocking their path. Kale nodded, formulating a quick plan. "I'll create a diversion. You take them out." He darted to the left, drawing the enemy's attention. The soldiers turned, firing at him, but Kale was too quick, his agile movements making him a difficult target. Zara seized the opportunity, her shots precise and deadly, taking down the soldiers one by one. With the path clear, they pressed on, finally reaching the enemy command ship. It loomed ahead, its dark hull bristling with weapons. Kale could see the command deck, the heart of their operations. "We need to get inside," Kale said, his voice barely audible over the din of battle. They approached the ship cautiously, using the shadows for cover. Kale spotted a maintenance hatch, a small, overlooked entry point. He motioned to Zara, and they slipped inside, navigating the narrow corridors with silent efficiency. Inside, the ship was a maze of technology and alien architecture. They moved quickly, avoiding detection until they reached the command deck. Kale could see the enemy commander, a tall, imposing figure, issuing orders. "Now," Kale whispered. In a coordinated strike, they burst into the command deck, weapons blazing. The element of surprise was on their side, and the enemy commander fell quickly. The remaining crew, caught off guard, were no match for Kale and Zara's combined skills. As the command deck fell silent, Kale accessed the ship systems, initiating a shutdown of their operations. The effect was immediate. Enemy ships outside began to falter, their coordination lost. "We did it," Zara said, her voice filled with relief. Kale nodded, a smile breaking through his serious demeanor. "This is just the beginning." With the command ship neutralized, they made their way back to the base. The tide of the battle had turned, their comrades rallying to push back the now disorganized enemy forces. As they entered the base, the once mocking eyes of their comrades were now filled with admiration and gratitude. Kale's small stature was no longer a source of ridicule but a symbol of ingenuity and bravery. The base buzzed with the energy of victory, but Kale knew this was just one battle in a much larger war. His journey was far from over, and the challenges ahead would require every ounce of his strength and cunning. Kale stood at the entrance of the command center, the metallic tang of blood and smoke filling his nostrils. The base was a battleground, but the morale had shifted dramatically. His recent success had given hope to his comrades, and the enemy was now on the defensive. "Kale, we've intercepted a transmission," Zara called out from the control console, her voice laced with urgency. "They're planning a counterattack. It's going to be massive." Kale hurried to her side, peering at the flickering holoscreen displaying enemy movements. "They're desperate," he muttered. "This could be their last stand." Commander Roar entered, his usually stern face showing signs of concern. "We need to act fast. If they regroup, we're finished." Kale nodded, formulating a plan on the spot. "We can't let them consolidate. We need to hit their supply lines. Without resources, their attack will crumble." Roar crossed his arms, considering. "It's risky, but it might just work. You've proven yourself, Kale. What do you need?" "Zara and a small, fast team. We'll strike hard and fast, disrupt their logistics before they can mount their offensive." As preparations were underway, the atmosphere in the base grew tense. Soldiers whispered among themselves, the weight of impending conflict heavy in the air. Kale's reputation had grown, and with it, the expectations. Failure was not an option. Kale and Zara led their team through the twisting corridors, emerging into the night under a sky lit by distant stars and closer explosions. The landscape was a mix of rocky terrain and scattered debris from ongoing skirmishes. "Stay close," Kale instructed, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. "We move in silent, hit their supply depots, and get out before they know what hit them." The team moved like shadows, navigating through the darkened landscape with precision. The first supply depot came into view, heavily guarded but not impenetrable. Kale signaled for the team to spread out, positioning themselves for a coordinated attack. "On my mark," Kale whispered into his calm 3, 2, now. The team sprang into action. Zara's sharpshooting took out the sentries, while Kale led the charge into the depot. The clash of metal and the hiss of energy weapons filled the air. Kale's small frame allowed him to dart between cover, his movements a blur as he engaged the enemy. In the midst of the fray, Kale spotted the depot's main control panel. "Cover me!" he shouted, making a dash for it. Zara and the team provided suppressive fire, keeping the enemy at bay. Kale reached the panel, quickly overriding the security protocols. With a few swift keystrokes, he set the depot systems to overload. "We've got 2 minutes before this place goes up," he warned, sprinting back to his team. The team withdrew, covering each other as they retreated. Just as they cleared the blast radius, the depot erupted in a fiery explosion, sending a shockwave through the ground. "One down," Zara said, breathing heavily but smiling. "Let's move to the next." They continued their assault, hitting multiple supply depots with surgical precision. Each explosion weakened the enemy's capacity to sustain their attack. As dawn approached, the team returned to the base, weary but triumphant. Inside the command center, the atmosphere had shifted. The intercepted communications showed the enemy forces in disarray, their plans falling apart without the necessary supplies. Roar greeted them with a rare smile. "Outstanding work. You've bought us crucial time." Kale nodded, the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. "This isn't over yet. They'll regroup and come at us again." Roar placed a hand on Kale's shoulder. "Then we'll be ready. You've proven that we can adapt and overcome. We'll keep fighting and we'll win." As the sun rose, casting a golden hue over the ravaged landscape, the base buzzed with renewed determination. Kale's actions had turned the tide, but the war was far from over. He knew that greater challenges lay ahead, and he was ready to face them. The dawn of the final battle arrived with an unsettling calm. The base, though scarred from recent skirmishes, stood resilient against the looming threat. Kale, now a figure of respect and hope among his comrades, stood at the forefront, his mind sharp and ready. "Sergeant Kale, we've confirmed their approach. It's now or never," Lieutenant Zara reported, her eyes reflecting a mixture of determination and concern. Kale nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "We can't let them gain a foothold. We strike hard and fast, disrupt their formations, and force a retreat." Commander Roar approached, his massive frame casting a long shadow. "This is it, Kale. We're counting on your strategy." The central conflict was clear. The enemy's final, desperate assault aimed to crush the base and seize control of the region. Kale knew that the enemy, though disorganized, would fight with ferocity. Kale turned to address the assembled soldiers, their faces a mosaic of different species and expressions. Listen up. Today we fight not just for survival but for each other. We've proven that size doesn't matter, only our will to stand together. Let's show them the true strength of unity. The soldiers responded with a resounding cheer, their spirits lifted by Kale's words. The tension in the air was palpable, but it was tempered by a steely resolve. The battle commenced with the enemy's forces converging on the base. Explosions rocked the ground, and the sky lit up with the fiery trails of missile fire. Kale and Zara led the charge, coordinating the defense with precision. Zara, take your team and flank them from the east. We'll hit their center and break their lines, Kale ordered, his voice unwavering amidst the chaos. Zara nodded, a fierce smile on her lips. On it, Kale. Let's show them what we're made of. Kale advanced with his squad, navigating through the barrage of enemy fire. The sensory overload of the battlefield, booming explosions, the acrid smell of burning metal, the sight of comrades fighting valiantly, only heightened his focus. He moved with agility, using his small size to his advantage, slipping through gaps and taking down targets with precision. The central conflict intensified as the enemy pushed harder, their desperation evident. Kale's mind raced, adapting his strategy in real time. He spotted the enemy commander, a formidable figure orchestrating the assault from an elevated position. There! Kale shouted, pointing to the commander. Take him out, and the rest will fall apart. With Zara's team providing cover, Kale led a daring charge toward the enemy commander. The path was fraught with danger, but Kale's determination was unyielding. He dodged incoming fire, his movements a blur of calculated precision. Reaching the enemy commander, Kale engaged in a fierce hand-to-hand combat. The commander, towering over him, underestimated Kale's speed and agility. Kale's strikes were swift and decisive, exploiting every opening. With a final, powerful blow, Kale incapacitated the enemy commander. The enemy forces, witnessing their leader's fall, began to waver. The tide of the battle turned, and the base's defenders rallied, pushing the enemy into a disorganized retreat. As the dust settled, the battlefield was eerily quiet. The enemy was defeated, their threat neutralized. Kale stood amidst the aftermath, his chest heaving with exhaustion, but his eyes shining with victory. Commander Roar approached, his expression a mixture of pride and relief. You did it, Kale. We all did. Kale nodded, a weary smile spreading across his face. We stood together, and that made all the difference. Zara joined them, her eyes twinkling with pride. Kale, you've proven that true strength lies in unity and strategy, not just brute force. As the sun set, casting a golden glow over the base, the soldiers gathered, their spirits lifted by the hard-fought victory. The sense of camaraderie was palpable, a testament to the bonds forged in the crucible of battle. Kale's journey from a ridiculed soldier to a respected leader was complete. He had shown that size did not determine one's worth or capability. It was heart, mind, and unity that truly mattered.